let's so we left off with algae. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Got to do that. We left off with algae, and it is a protist, and then now we were getting into protozoa when when we ran out of time and had to wrap it up. So let's jump into now protozoa. Let me pin myself. Okay. So unlike algae, protozoa are heterotrophic. They don't have chloroplast for photosynthesis. And there is a diverse array of protozoa because they've been around for a long time, right? We're talking about the early eukaryotic organisms here, from those prokaryotes that started engulfing other prokaryotes to turn into eukaryotes. These are some of those early forms. The cell shape can vary quite a bit. Some have flagella, some have cilia, some have neither. And what distinguishes the protozoa from the algae is not only a lack of chloroplasts, but a lack of a cell wall. So if you remember from Monday, algae has a cell wall on the outside. Protozoa do not have that cell wall. Most of them are harmless. They live freely, usually in a sufficiently hydrated habitat like water, fresh water, salt water. They are unicellular primarily. We don't see them in colonies like we do with algae. And so if there were a question on the final, compare and contrast algae and protozoa, these could be some ways that you could do that, right? Lack of a cell wall, lack of chloroplasts, lack of colonies. Some of these, while most are free living, some of these are parasitic, often transmitted via animal or insect, specifically vectors. So think malaria, transmitted by the mosquito. Not all of them have insect vectors. Some of them we can just acquire by entering water. That we'll talk about. And one other interesting aspect of protozoa is that their cytoplasm, the stuff inside the cell, like the fluid, the matrix inside, is divided into two different types: an ectoplasm, which is an outer part of the cytoplasm, and then an endoplasm, which is more internally located. And the way they eat is that they take in other microbes. Okay, so some protozoa will attack other protozoa. Some of them will attack organic matter and engulf that. With the malaria parasite, Plasmodia, those will feed on red blood cells. So a number of different ways they get their food. Most of them have the ability to move. Okay, so whether it's a flagellum or a cilia or what we call pseudopods, like kind of feet, essentially, most of them can move. And they have a life cycle that is demonstrated in this diagram here. What you'll see here is that often there's this trophozoite. And if we have time to get into the final lecture on the parasites, we'll talk about the different life stages. But for now, let's just focus on basically the active stage and then the dormant stage. The trophozoite is going to be the active feeding stage. Once it reaches conditions that are unfavorable, much like certain bacteria that make endospores, the trophozoite can start forming this cyst around itself, okay? And that's called encystment. Great. So what you see here is it's starting to build around itself this wall, okay? And then once that wall is completed, it can hang out until it gets into a sufficiently hydrated environment that has nutrients. And then that wall will break open, that cyst, and it will then be a reactivated trophozoite. Okay. So very resilient. And the reproductive mechanism is through asexual reproduction. Okay. So these cells can divide via mitosis, or they can kind of bud off via fission, depending on the flavor of protozoa. In some cases, there will be a potential for sexual reproduction, just like the fungi that we talked about, right? They can produce asexually, or if the conditions are right and they come across another individual, they can reproduce sexually. And in this case, the protozoa will reproduce sexually via conjugation, which is a mechanism that bacteria also use to transfer DNA from one cell to another, right? And remember, as I say, Mother Nature likes to recycle. It doesn't like to reinvent the wheel. So it makes sense that these early eukaryotic organisms still have some carryover mechanisms employed by the prokaryotes, right? Whether it's flagella for locomotion or conjugation for reproduction. The morphology of protozoa are in 4 different categories, and you need to be familiar with these categories. It's not too challenging. You have the masticophorans, which have flagella, okay? Right here, this long little tail whips it all around. And then we have amoeba. Amoeba are the ones with pseudopods, okay? So they have these, well, hold on, let me get my thing here. They have these projections coming off the end of them, right? Much like our own cells that make up our body can migrate by extending, by polymerizing the actin filaments and taking the cell and reaching out like this, and then reaching. That's what the amoeba does. Okay, it polarizes the outer cell wall, and it like kind of throws itself out. Okay, and then it retracts. It depolymerizes from the back end, and it can move along like that by using these pseudopods or fake feet. Ciliophorans are going to be ciliated. Okay, so remember, cilia aren't as long as flagella, and so they're just these little wispy things all around that will vibrate like this, and it'll flutter around and move like that. And of course, all of this is typically in water, so it allows it to move within the fluid by using these cilia. And then apicoplexans are non-modal. Apicoplexans are going to be things like the malaria parasite, Plasmodium. And so these are the 4 categories. I'm not really going to go into like make you guys know the anatomy of all of these 4. It's basically similar for the most part, right? What I want you to simply know at this point is that masticophorans have flagella, amoebas have pseudopods, ciliophorans have cilia, and apicoplexans have none of the above. They are non-modal. Okay. let's get into those 4 categories. So the masticophorans, also known as zoomasticophoran, some examples of those are the trichonympha, which interestingly is a parasite of termites. So they enter into a, um, I guess they're not parasites per se because they have benefits. So the the termite provides a home for the masticophoran. I don't really recall. I don't remember what the masticophoran does um, to the termite. I don't know if it might. I want to say that it keeps other parasites at bay, like it feeds on the parasites that um, try to attack the intestine of the termite. But I'm not positive. I have to go back and review that. Another common masticophoran is Giardia, which comes from water and will infect your intestine if you drink that water, right? And so this is what commonly people will get when they're out in the backcountry and they're drinking from a stream, or they're swimming and they're taking in big gulps of water for whatever reason. Okay. Um, so Giardia is a form of a masticophoran, and you can see it has the flagella right there. Whoop, coming out here. Looks like 3 of them. Sarcodina, that is going to be the amoebas, and they come in different varieties. This is a giant amoeba on the left, and you can see it looks much like that cartoon. It has all of these pseudopod, these finger-like projections coming out, using it for motility. It's going to eat diatoms, which are algae, right? So the other protists, a lot of these protists feed on each other. Again, it harkens back to a time when that was all that was around. That was the food source, right? So not really. Uh, they don't attack their own species per se and eat their own species, but they will go after other protozoan or other protists like algae. And then the entamoeba is an amoeba that will cause dysentery. Okay, so it disturbs your digestive tract and gives you diarrhea and cramping, and it's very unpleasant. Don't leave your contacts in overnight. Take them out, put them in the little, the tray. Put the solution in there. Don't use water, right? This is an example of an acanthamoeba. An acanthamoeba can infect the eye and cause keratitis. Okay, so what you see on the left is an eyeball, and it's all greenish and cloudy and opaque. The acanthamoeba is that image on the right. And this can happen from swimming in um, water and disrupting the soil. Usually, these amoeba live in the soil sediment at the bottom, but people get in, they start stirring it up, and then it becomes, resuspended in the water. And then you're swimming around and it gets in your eye. You can get this. This picture was actually from um, a person who had left their contacts in for months, and as a result, had an amoeba trapped, and it causes blindness. Right, so the thing that's supposed to make you see better, um, used improperly, can take away your sight. So it's kind of an ironic twist. Change your contacts. I don't even know how people don't change. I mean, if I leave my contacts in and forget to take them out, I wake up in the middle of the night, my eyes are all on fire and crusty, and it's terrible. So I don't know how people even do that, but whatever. Ciliophora. Here are two examples. Interestingly, as I mentioned, certain protozoa will attack other protozoa, and it's an age-old battle between the ciliates. On the left, there is a predator, which is in the left image, the ciliate on the right. All right, so highlight it here. This guy here is a predator of this other cilia, this paramecium here. And so it's going to engulf and attack and eat that other one. Other versions, the Balantidium coli is a parasite in pigs. And so if you eat undercooked pork, you can get all kinds of different illnesses, whether it be viruses or bacteria or worms, helminthic infections, or cilioforeign infection. Always good if you're going to eat pork to cook it thoroughly. And, I have, it's not a hypothesis or anything, but, I strongly believe that there are a lot of religions that don't eat pork because, and I'm not a religious scholar by any means, but it seems like a long time ago, there were probably incidents of eating undercooked pork and people got really sick. And so, one way to protect a community from rampant infection and pathogenesis is to just say, hey, we're not going to eat this particular animal. And pigs just happen to be very biologically similar to humans. That's why some of their organs can be transplanted and grafted into humans. That's why oftentimes many of their microbial pathogens carry over and can infect us as well. Okay, that's clear. And then finally, the apicaplexa. So again, Plasmodium, which causes malaria, Cryptosporidium, which is often something that can plague patients that have AIDS and they're immunocompromised, and then they get these cryptosporidial infections and succumb based on that. Non-modal. Okay, so you see there's no cilia or flagella or pseudopod projections coming off of these parasites. And then that brings us into the helminths. Okay, so the helminths are going to be different from the protozoa and the algae in that they are multicellular, right? These are worms. Now, some worms are not microbes, right? We can see them. Some of these worms that we consider microbial, we consider them microbial because their larval stages are microscopic, and then as they develop and they go through metamorphosis, they get larger and they become macroscopic. So this is kind of on the edge or the cusp of what we consider to be microbial in nature, but we still count them. They are going to be, again, multicellular. They will have actual distinct organs, right? Tissues. They can digest food through these organs. They have intestines, right? They have reproductive organs. So much more complex than anything we've talked about up until now. And that's why we kind of save it for the very end, right? And the vast majority of helminths are free living. However, the ones that aren't are common parasites. They have these mouth parts that are used to scolex, these hooks that are used to attach into your digestive tract and siphon off some of the food that you eat oftentimes. And so they have a life cycle too that is interesting. that can be intermediate for us or can be an intermediate step for some other animal. And so will exist outside of us and inside of us, depending on the stage at which that worm is. Two major groups, flatworms and roundworms. Okay. The flatworms are flat and they're flat because they don't have this defined body cavity. Okay. They don't have an intestine, really. It's just this kind of sac. And they do have a nervous system. Roundworms have a nervous system as well. Um, it's not a localized brain per se. But they do have axons and neurons that are dappled throughout their body. And the flatworms are going to be your tapeworms. Okay, the flatworms are going to be flukes. Um, these are going to be the things that have the scolex, the hooks, and then they suck, and they can either suck on your blood or they can again eat some of your food. But typically, because they don't have a robust digestive tract, they will primarily be bloodsuckers. Roundworms, nematodes, one of my favorite animals of all time, because I studied nematodes. A non-parasitic nematode, Cyanarhabditis elegans, is a model organism used in research, and I used that organism to discover new viruses that infected it. And then I looked at the immune responses and genes that were used to be either proviral or antiviral. And the idea is that if we can find novel antiviral genes in the worm, if any of those worms have genes that are conserved in humans, maybe we can find some novel um, antiviral pathways. But anyway, they're going to be more complex than the flatworms. They're going to have an intestine. They have this protective surface on the outside called the cuticle. It's just a thick collagenous shell, kind of. Um, some of them, if they're parasitic, they'll have spines or hooks. Um, and their nervous system, like the flatworms, is going to be present, but very, very basic. Of the vast array of helminths, there's about 50 different species that parasitize humans. And these are found worldwide. Some are endemic to specific regions, particularly in the tropics. A lot of the neglected tropical diseases that we've talked about, or not really talked about, but that I've mentioned, that concept, involve parasitic worms. How it happens is that you typically eat the larvae, not always. Sometimes you can have them attack an open wound in your foot, for instance, if you're walking around barefoot. But usually it's ingested, whether it's through food, or a lot of times children will, pick their butt and then put their hand in their mouth. And so they, do it that way. Um, it can come from contaminated soil as well. And in some cases, insect vectors, but that's on the rarer side. And it's a pretty rampant disease in that it impacts billions of humans. I mean, right? Billions, that's a big number. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily kill billions, but as if we have a chance to get into that lecture, you'll see that some of the disease that is caused from this is quite debilitating. Even if it doesn't become life-threatening, it's going to severely impact your quality of life. And oh yeah, so here's the life cycle, for instance, of a pinworm. So kids, right? Here's this child here that is got one hand behind them and the other hand in their mouth, and and they're, transmitting the eggs back into their mouth, and then, oh, they find some other kid and they're like, oh, look what's on my hand, this is this white little thing, and then they spread it to the next kid. And so, oftentimes in developed regions, pinworm and other types of helminthic infections are going to crop up in children just because of their human behavior. Um, okay, that's that. Any questions on that, guys?
What about ringworm? Would that be considered a helminth?
No, interestingly, ringworm isn't a worm.
Hmm.
um, and we'll talk. Well, we might get into it today, actually. But it is called ringworm, I think, because it forms a ring like structure on the outside of the skin. And in some cases, and maybe they thought that it came from a worm initially. I don't recall the etiology of that name, but it's a fungus. Also,
Interesting. Yeah. Well, one of my friends, they sleep with their dogs in the bed, and I guess like one morning they woke up and they had ringworm from sleeping with the dogs.
yeah, yes, dogs are. I love my dog. I think everyone should, you know, if they don't have a dog, if they're not allergic to dogs, they should spend time with dogs because it's just so good for um, the mind to have a dog. They're awesome. However, they are animals that you don't really want to cozy up with that much. And some people, there's this old urban legend or whatever you want to call it, where they have this antibacterial saliva and that's why they lick their wounds and stuff like that. A dog's mouth is disgusting. Never let a dog lick your wound, okay? It might be true that it has some degree of antimicrobial enzymes in the saliva, but the reason primarily I think that they lick their wounds is because they have paws, right? They can't put a band-aid on. They can't, what else do they have? They have their tongue. And that's why they lick their wounds. And people have gotten some pretty nasty infections from letting dogs, lick their mouths and, just lick them. I try not to let my dog lick me, and he's a licker. And so yeah, that's my recommendation. Stay away from their mouths. Any other questions?
Hey Doc, going back to pinworms, I don't remember if it was story, fact, fiction. Uh, Pinworms, are they able to leave the anal orifice at night, especially under the full moon, and then re-enter? Or is this just
Yeah, I have no idea if they have a circadian rhythm that's linked to the celestial bodies in our solar system, but I do know that one way to um, find it is that you can put masking tape on a kid's anus, and that will, and you remove it, and you can see sometimes the eggs that have shed. I don't know if the worm actually comes all the way out, or if it does just in its movement just tend to kind of poke out at some times. Um, but I have no idea if it's timed or linked with a full moon. Interesting, interesting to think about, though.
Professor,
Yeah.
so Hermes, is it belong to the kingdom Protis or
No,
not?
no. The helminths are going to be worms. Okay.
Mm.
So if you think about um, protists, you are going to just be talking about simply uh, the the protozoa and the algae. Okay.
Thank you.
Helminths are not going to be protists.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions?
Yeah, have you ever heard of so when I lived in Chicago, my friend worked in the ER and she was telling me this lady came in and she had like worms in her brain and it was from eating pork and she actually died and I guess there was like a few people in her like family that had that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's extraordinarily rare. I don't know if I've heard of it with pork, but I do know that sometimes improperly prepared sushi, so raw fish that hasn't been flash frozen or isn't, as fresh as it should be, can lead to that kind of pathogenesis, right? And it's extraordinarily rare for them to reach the brain, but yeah, it does happen. It makes you think twice about going to Rayleigh's and getting sushi there.
Oh yeah, since she told me I was like that's really terrifying. Like
Gas station sushi.
yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, I would be, and by no means is this meant to terrify all of you guys. Like think about the beauty about our immune system, right? Is that we are encountering all of these things that we've talked about this quarter on a daily basis, right? And we're for the most part okay, right? So these are things to consider, but I don't want to scare you guys away from eating. If any of you enjoy eating pork, um, just cook it properly, right? If you enjoy sushi, make sure you get it from a really reputable source. Sometimes I like to do um, some poke bowls and stuff like that, and that's raw fish, and you got to be careful. But by and large, these crazy things that happen, the acanthamoeba in the eye that causes the keratitis, these are rare things. So by no means am I trying to terrify you all, right? But it's good to be aware of what's out there. Anything else, guys?
How about a fresh vegetable, Professor? Do you think that it may cause some kind of infection or bacteria to get into our body?
What's that?
The
I'm
fresh
sorry.
vegetable,
Fresh vegetables.
yes.
And what about the fresh vegetables?
Like because like in my cultures we eat a lot of raw vegetable.
Mhm.
So do you think that is that harmful with the like potential to have some kind of disease like this?
Not typically. Um, Usually when vegetables have contamination, it's going to be bacterial contamination, and quite frequently it's as a result of being packaged up and just ice, and you're just like hermetically sealing off that vegetable. So if you go to the grocery store and you get that package of mixed greens or spinach, and it's in that plastic sealed bag from Dole or wherever, that's where we commonly see these bacterial outbreaks like E. coli and stuff. If you're getting fresh veggies from a farmer's market or something like that, typically they're fine, and it's good to eat fresh vegetables. And so I don't want to discourage anyone from that, particularly because they have fiber. And if you guys remember the microbiome paper, fiber is very good for you in terms of not just keeping you regular, but keeping your microbiota happy and away from that epithelial lining that that separates the bacteria from your immune system, right? So minimizes chronic inflammation, minimizes leaky gut, all of that. And so I wouldn't be too concerned with eating fresh vegetables in terms.
Usually like before like the vegetable, I put in the refrigerator, keep it for a few days, and then it turned like dark, things like that. Before I eat it, but now after this class, I feel like I'm scared, so I throw it away. So
Well, it depends. If you keep it in a refrigerator is microbiostatic, so that low temperature should keep the bacteria down. And remember, all infectious disease has an ID, an infectious dose. You need a certain number of cells or particles in order to infect you. And so commonly, when you refrigerate veggies, the worst thing that happens is that they just get moldy and they rot, and then you're not going to eat it, right? Because you see that on there. If you take those fresh veggies and you cook them, you're going to, decrease it even more. So if you're eating them raw, that's going to be different than if you are cooking fresh vegetables. The cooking process is going to pretty much, kill off anything that's going to be harmful. So it just depends on the delivery system into your body.
thank you.
Yeah, quick story. Dr. Franz, in a different life, pre-family, pre-kids, I was doing the northern southern hemisphere winter to winter for half a dozen years there, and I would sneak in a quick summer, usually in Brazil, and I would run around barefoot most of the time in these tropical places, and I got what's called bicho do pie, which is when Kata went in there, she thought it was a sliver in my big toe. But when she went into the needle to remove it, there was I think she counted like 28 eggs that exploded out of my toe. So something had got in my big toe and then was starting to produce.
Exactly. That's the issue with walking around barefoot. Like I said, you can ingest them, and they can attack your feet, because that's what's coming into contact with the soil, and the soil is going to have, and especially if you're in a more rural area, there's going to be animals and they poop, and then that dries up, and then it just kind of spreads around. You don't think you're walking in, you're not like stepping in a big dung pile, but it basically dries up and then spreads around, and they're just little particles, and then those particles have the eggs. And so there's a case study example of this happening to someone, not just me talking about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's when the romantic foot massage times stopped, because no more foot massages after that incident. I don't know what happened.
I don't blame her. Interesting. Well, did you have to seek medical treatment or anything, or did she just kind of basically debris out all of the eggs and you left it at that, or what did you do?
Yeah, they were big enough. I'm thinking of tapioca pudding, really, if that's an analogy. So she could see every single one clearly, and that was it. It bled for a little bit and good to go. But I started wearing Havaianas, sandals after that. No more barefoot for me.
Yeah. So interestingly, the Caduceus menadensis. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the caduceus, but here, let me see if I can. Let's try something. Let's go to whiteboard, and I'm going to do a terrible drawing for you all. Can you see a whiteboard? Do you see anything here?
Yep, we see it. Okay. I see it.
So you've all seen this thing. It looks like this. And then there's, in a medical setting, then there's this. Maybe sometimes there are wings. Actually, why? I don't know why I'm drawing. No, that's terrible. Let me just pull one up. I do have access to internet here, right? So, caduceus metanensis. Here we go. Okay. Now share. Okay. You guys have all seen this, right? Right. This is it's called the caduceus. And the wings are actually not the true authentic caduceus. That came later. The wings represent Hermes, which was the god of it was a messenger god, I believe, but then also was the god of healing. The ones with wings aren't, like I said, the true authentic one. This one right here, the staff with what looks like a snake wrapped around it, that is the original caduceus. Anybody know why that is a symbol for medicine?
I'm thinking we're getting back to parasites. Worms.
Worms. So one way to treat worm parasitism, if it is not in your digestive tract, but in your skin, subcutaneous, is to probe a little bit in that region and just get a little piece of the worm, enough to wrap it around a little stick. And then every day, the healer would turn the stick just ever so slightly. And then the next day, turn it again slowly, because if you do it too fast, you'll just break off the end of the worm and then it's still inside you. But if you do it slowly and incrementally, then you're extracting the worm out. Okay. And so it winds around the stick. And so that became this international symbol of medicine called the Caduceus Medinensis. Okay. And it goes back to worms. Okay. So now you know. Okay, guys, I think we'll take a 9-minute break and then we'll get into some more presentations. I hope some of you guys are ready. We did not get into the fungi lecture. We did not get into the protist and helminth lecture. I have 2 more lectures that I want to do, but I only have 1 more lecture period and I have a bunch of presentations to come up. So we may not get to it, unfortunately. We'll just have to play it by ear. I will post my slide decks regardless. If we don't get to them, you won't be responsible for knowing the material. But if you want to look at the slide decks, then they'll be there for your review. Okay. And because I think it's cool stuff. But anyway, we'll just see. We'll see how many presentations we get to today. And again, like I said, if there aren't many, then maybe I'll just jump into a lecture. Okay. But